I'm Jack Newton, CEO and co-founder of Clio, the world's leading cloud-based legal software provider. In each episode of Daily Matters, we'll explore what this new normal means for law firms, how legal professionals can find success while working remotely, and how lawyers can best serve their clients during this unprecedented situation. Today's guest is Molly McDonough, owner of McDonough Media LLC and the former managing editor and publisher of the ABA Journal, where she worked for 18 years. Molly, thanks so much for joining us on Access to Justice Week on the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Jack. I'm excited to be here.
It's great to have you here. Molly, first of all, I'd love to ask you what's on your mind most right now?
Well, the week is perfect for me. Access to justice has been somewhat of an obsession for me, especially since the pandemic. Even before then, it was one of the areas I really wanted to work in after leaving the ABA. It was a passion area for me at the Journal. Access to justice stories. And in related stories, second chances, some of the big projects we tackled while I was at the Journal really made me want to dig deeper into coming up with solutions instead of just reporting on the problems.
That's great, and I, as long as I've known you, and I've been in the legal industry for over 12 years now, which is hard for me to believe. But when I entered the industry, you were one of the first people I met. I think it was at a Beer for Bloggers at ABA Tech Show way back in the day. And as I mentioned in the intro, you were at the ABA Journal for 18 years, which is incredible. Ended your career there as the editor and the publisher. And over the course of that trajectory, when did you first find yourself getting drawn into access to justice issues, and what were some of the patterns you saw maybe over the course of your career?
So, I was covering rural communities in South Carolina, and it was probably my first dealings with the ABA during that time, partly looking for model rules for lawyer conduct, a lot of lawyer misconduct stories in general newspapers.
Mm-hmm.
And I was covering advertising and things like that. And I started to really find what the Legal Services Corporation was doing to be fascinating and underappreciated, especially in rural communities. So I was covering LSC back then. It probably helps that, I said offline a little earlier that my mother is a retired administrative law judge for the state of California.
Right.
She was a paralegal for legal aid before
you
she
had
went
some
to law
context
school.
there.
Right. I kind of grew up as a legal aid child and passionate about access to justice and making sure that vulnerable populations aren't left behind.
So tell us a little bit about, it sounds like a very early interest in access to justice as a theme. What have some of your learnings been about what the access to justice landscape looks like from, maybe framing it pre-COVID-19 and how you're seeing COVID-19 really impact access to justice now, and what challenges you think might lie ahead?
Sure. Before COVID-19, we were facing an access to justice crisis. We already were experiencing a massive gap in access by low income and moderate income families and individuals. And, that's one of the areas that I've wanted to focus on a lot since leaving the ABA, is that I think it's underappreciated for the profession too, the access gap for middle income Americans, from my perspective. And to me, it's a gap and an opportunity for lawyers to fill that gap. And I'm interested in how technology tools can be used to help lawyers be more efficient and deliver services in ways that help them make a living, but at the same time provide much greater access to many more people. who I think the common LSE numbers are that, some like 85% of the population isn't getting the services they need, or even know that they have a legal issue that
Right.
could be resolved with some assistance.
And where do you see there's so many ways to tackle this problem, and it is a broad problem with so many facets and elements contributing to the access to justice gap. I think when we talk about access to justice, we sometimes leap immediately to pro bono services and helping the really underprivileged, and that's certainly one element of the discussion. But can you talk about how you think about access to justice in a more holistic way, and what the spectrum of legal needs looks like, and maybe how you think law firms could be thinking differently about delivering legal services to those broad spectrum of needs?
Yeah, sure. So again, like back to that whole area that, it's every access point.
Yeah.
One of the problems I see is that um, that there's been an increasing complexity of the system, and the justice system is so dated in its approach, compared to what the consumer population is used to dealing with in terms of services and benefits. So, one of the problems that I see is that courts and the justice system is so behind in how it communicates uh, solutions to people, that that many people don't even know how to access the courts. So, and that applies to anyone at any level. So, even if you have the money to hire a lawyer, do you know, what type of lawyer to hire, or, where to go to even find a lawyer? There's so many barriers to getting that entry point into the justice system. To me, it's for everyone. And you asked
As you
earlier
pointed out,
about
even sometimes recognizing that you have a legal issue that a lawyer can
right,
help you with.
right. Right. And so since COVID-19, one of the things that I've seen happen the most is this kind of explosion of collaboration. And it's almost like a revelation in the legal profession, legal industry, that collaboration is possible. Every
Right.
single call I've been on, people say, the silver lining for this is that we're talking now. And I've been thinking a lot about that. And it's not that they weren't talking before, but the conversations now have a purpose, and they're all urgent and solutions driven. So everybody is really paying much closer attention to the experimenting that's happening now, I think. And and really, I heard, I was just catching up with a briefing that the National Center for State Courts has been hosting on opening the courts for jury trials and the experimentation going on. And there's just so much happening all over the country. So it's really exciting to see all that. And people who are in their own areas at the cutting edge would each come on their, when it was their turn, saying, I took so many notes. And you could tell they're like literally just getting finished taking notes before it's their turn.
Right. Right.
So it's really interesting to see that dynamic and that energy.
And when you talk about collaboration, where are you seeing that happen? What parties are you seeing get together and solving problems together that maybe, as you pointed out, maybe weren't? It's not the case that they weren't collaborating before, but there's maybe an urgency and a solution orientation that COVID-19 is demanding that didn't exist prior.
So before pre-COVID-19, you would hear people say that everyone fears change, and adoption to new technologies is really slow. All of that has just been washed away. So, and I'm sure you've heard a million times, we've seen in 10 weeks, 10 to 15 years of advancement
Yeah.
in technology. I mean, and for me, what I would love to see come out of this is that this created, is creating a renaissance in legal services. That this is a time of just kind of massive change and experimentation. And one of the things that I'm particularly happy to see is that consistently I'm hearing judges that I never would have heard them say before, that they're not going back to pre-COVID operations. They've learned so much so quickly about how to make their courts more efficient and accessible, and easier for lawyers and judges and litigants. One of the call that I was just referencing, one of the lessons for that first Zoom trial out of Texas a couple weeks ago, it was a jury trial, was that the lawyers were surprised that the witnesses were, and both the witnesses were more comfortable with their answers, and the jurors were more comfortable in during questioning and jury selection.
Interesting.
So they were more forthcoming with their answers and seemed more relaxed, less nervous. It was easier for the lawyers to gauge the kind of personalities and get a feeling for the jurors.
So I want to explore the courts aspect of access to justice a little bit. Can you talk about, from your perspective, what some of the barriers that the old operating model for courts presented, and maybe how you're seeing technology fit in here and help make courts more accessible than they were previously?
Sure, and a lot of this, and I've heard similar things from courts in Canada as well, that there are huge distances that we require people to travel to come to court on a single day, and for docket-driven type court processes, we have sometimes hundreds of lawyers and their clients coming into the court for routine hearings. That should go away after this, or in this process. We should now know enough to know that we can handle a lot of those hearings remotely. Those status checks, those hearings that are all tied to everybody showing up in a single day, spending hours sometimes traveling to get to court. Those should all, to me, go to a new form of delivery and meeting, whether that's teleconference or video or paper even. I'm hearing that I think in Alberta they're doing some just paper decisions where paper is mailed or shipped, and then and decisions are sent back.
Okay.
What I'm hearing from other judges is that you can do that for a vast majority of the cases, and take those off of your dockets. I think in Miami, one of the judges was saying that they're planning all of their case management, and this is common so many places, all of their case management for all of their cases is based on a docket schedule. So you set a trial date, and then everything, you kind of back up everything
Right.
that goes before that. Well, why do you have to do that in 85% of your cases? So 85% of your cases don't make it to trial, but you're putting everybody through 100% of your cases through the same process. So
Right.
if you can take out 85% and only start to deal with the ones that become problematic and need to be done in person, then you free up an enormous amount of resources and time.
Yeah. It's interesting, and it fits into what we're seeing a little bit at a macro level as well, where so much of how we're thinking about the evolution of work, even outside of the courthouses, is thinking about how do we shift synchronous communication to asynchronous communication. And it feels like the courts are kind of undergoing that change as well. They've very much got a tradition of synchronous communication, synchronous ceremonies, saying everybody needs to show up at this time and place, and we'll make a decision or we'll advance the case. Something will
Mhm.
happen. And maybe the realization, I think, as we're seeing in many other areas of work, more generally, maybe this meeting doesn't need to be a meeting. Maybe this can be a written document that we collaborate on asynchronously. Maybe this can be something we talk about in a Slack channel. Maybe this can be an email thread, and we can have the same outcome, but not demand that everyone show up in a room at a specific time and place the way that we did pre-COVID-19. And that feels like maybe one of the, if we're hopeful, one of the enduring changes we'll see on the other side of this crisis.
Well, and your operation is, because you have so many different offices too, and you guys have always found ways to stay connected. And
Right.
so, do you feel like that's kind of kept you ahead of the game too, or more prepared to be able to manage through this crisis?
I feel like there's a couple of things that really set us up for the transition. We have over 500 employees worldwide now, and 5 worldwide offices that we shut down back on March 13th. And I think thanks to the fact that we drink our own champagne at Clio, as I like to say, and we use only cloud-based services to run the company. Everything from our phone system to our email systems and calendaring and code deployment systems for our product team are all cloud-based. So that technology infrastructure was pre-existing. I was pretty amazed when we had our first day of work from home. The following business day, we didn't miss a beat, and I was really surprised by just how much agility there was across the organization. And I think what we found is exactly this what we felt we needed to get in a room and needed to get in a meeting to do, even though we were fairly distributed. I would describe our culture as probably office first, and a bit of a preference for being in the office with remote employees, or even the remote office dialing in, having a little bit of a second class experience. And when you make everybody remote, it levels the playing field in a really interesting way. And I think if I tie that back to what you were commenting on with the jury and others feeling more comfortable and more at ease with this kind of a Zoom based environment, I do think it levels the playing field a little bit. You don't have some of the dynamics that can actually be fairly intimidating in a physical courtroom, go away. And I'd love your perspective on that as well. Is that something you'd agree with?
Yes, and it's really interesting. I think it makes perfect sense, but I was really surprised, and I'm extremely excited that so many of these courts aren't just trying these new things. They're doing surveys and testing, and really taking a deep look. And I think I mentioned in Texas, they asked the jurors, and they asked jurors that had previously served what they thought, and they prefer this remote experience. And this was for a non-binding case. They acknowledge they're not ready for a binding trial. They have this opportunity, the system there, where they can have a non-binding trial, and the jurors had already been qualified to serve, so they didn't have to go through to evaluate a new big panel.
Right.
But the jurors said that one of the things they liked was they got to see the lawyers more clearly, the witnesses more clearly, and they got to see the evidence more clearly. In the past, they could barely see, and they had trouble hearing, and everything was much easier to manage. And I've heard a lot of judges say, because family cases and emergency family cases are still ongoing in most jurisdictions, and I'm hearing a lot about children and witnesses who normally would be really shy to speak are much more comfortable in this environment, and more forthcoming with information. So I think that's really interesting, and I've heard similarly that lawyers are feeling like they get equal attention.
Right.
Everybody's screen is the same size.
Right. Nobody's taller than somebody else, or yeah. I think that's really interesting. It is really something that levels the playing field, and hopefully lets the facts stand on their own in a bit more of a clear way. Um, I'm wondering, on the other side of this equation, have you had conversations with judges or others that feel like they want to go back to the old way of doing things, that they're not able to achieve what they want to from a Zoom call? I've heard secondhand, admittedly, anecdotes of some judges, for example, commenting to the effect that they they need to see somebody in person to judge their character. They need to see the whites of somebody's eyes, and that goes away through a Zoom call. Have you heard similar kind of feedback in the conversations you've had?
I have, and for depositions too. I think there are skills that can be learned and technologies that can be improved to help with that. Um, but I don't disagree that in many cases, in person is still better. And I think in person at a certain stage is critical. Now, I mean, still, when the stakes are high, lives are on the line.
Yeah.
I just, there's the biggest issue right now that courts are grappling with is how to handle felony jury trials, and how to manage that safely. Oregon has been continuing to do jury trials, and they're doing some. One of the counties in Oregon is doing some interesting things with social distancing to make sure the jurors are really separated. They're using 2 large courtrooms. They do one to hold the case, and another one for deliberations. And they've already started looking at, like, down the street at the state capitol and university setting and a firefighter training facility where they're going to try to get deliberation space so they can
Wow.
still have social distancing and continue to hear and manage cases, but in a safe way. I'm hearing a lot of managing the spread of COVID and not preventing it. It's more,
Right.
it's
Right.
dealing with the fact that it's here for now and we don't have a vaccine, and we can't stop the courts. So
Very interesting. When you think about access to justice, and maybe some of the ways that you think that we might come on the other side of this crisis with improved access to justice, or at least the knowledge of the tools that can help increase access to justice. We've talked about a few ways that we're seeing improvements. We're seeing the courts warm to technologies that can help them scale, and maybe even wholesale changes in process that can help them hear more cases and provide more accessibility to the courts. Are there other, and again, you've got a broad experience to draw from, are there other things that the legal profession should be thinking about to help improve access to justice, either in the context of COVID-19 or otherwise?
um, so I think for just for anyone who wants to be involved, like you said earlier, it's more than pro bono is critical and volunteering is critical, but also learning, training, listening, really being part of this collaboration conversation, being willing to learn and listen to how other industries have resolved problems you're seeing. Um, I'm still starting, and I hear innovators and futurists talk about this so much. It's very frustrating to watch an entity or a part of the justice system treat a problem like it's unique to them,
Right.
um, and solve that from scratch. And so, and one of the things I think this time period has created is this urgency to break that silo and to see what other people are doing and to learn from them, learn from mistakes, be willing to share things. The failures is so important. I think for anyone involved in the legal profession, kind of being able to be part of those conversations, being as a lawyer active in your bar associations or other organizations that are looking for not just talking about problems, but looking for solutions and identifying common problems and solutions, and partnering with people who are solutions oriented is what is an important way to resolve access to justice issues.
And for
And
people that
I'm
want
going to
it,
just, I'll take it back
go
to your
ahead.
book too. Just, doing some really looking at, how your clients respond, and, what are the pain points for them in dealing with you as a lawyer,
Right.
making sure you're having those conversations with your clients and the people you want to be your clients, and making sure you're not creating barriers.
Yeah, working back from their needs as the starting point for how you're delivering your legal services. And I do think that it's the access to justice conversation sometimes is too narrow. And when we think about it as a broader product market fit problem, almost between the way lawyers in general and legal services in general are delivered, there's a huge product market fit problem, whether it's the 77% number from the World Justice Project or the 85% number you cited from the Legal Services Corporation. We see this massive mismatch between supply and demand of legal services. And I think at the end of the day, an important message for lawyers to hear is there's an unbelievable amount of opportunity out there if you can figure out how to tap into that latent legal market, which is a vast majority of the overall market, waiting for lawyers and law firms to figure out how to solve their needs and how to deliver an experience that caters to their specific situation.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, Molly, I'd love to end, maybe talking about if people want to get involved. You've got a broad spectrum, of organizations, and you've mentioned some of the places you're seeing great work happening. Are there resources you would send people to, websites or organizations you'd encourage them to get engaged with if they want to help advance access to justice?
I do. I think the Legal Services Corporation is doing amazing work on the civil legal side. In particular, right now they're having regular briefings, and I think they're doing them through Zoom and Facebook Live. So I've kind of made sure I get notified whenever they have a new one of those.
Okay.
And then I'm really impressed with there's a rapid response team from the Conference of Chief Justices, and I can't remember, the Conference of State Court Administrators, through the National Center for State Courts. So many acronyms. So,
I,
and
I I heard this group called out on the ABA task force around COVID-19, called out yesterday for just doing truly excellent work, though. So I've heard them mentioned as well.
Yeah, this and I was just struck today about how much effort has gone into. If you looked at the National Center for State Court pages 3 months ago, the resources just were not there, and they have just pulled out all the stops, and they have tons of data. They've been tracking every closure order they can get their hands on. They've been tracking every single jury status order so you can see the whole United States in color, like who's opening in June, July,
Wow.
August, indefinite closures. They have all these tools, but my favorite parts are the webinars where you get to hear boots on the ground experiences from courts and what they're trying and what's not working, and having those discussions and taking questions. And they have thousands of people on these calls. I could not believe it. It was like, I think one of their last calls had 3,000 people on it.
Wow.
And they're mostly court administrators when they do the polling. It's really, it's good to see. It's good to see this level of collaboration and learning happening. And I'm like I said before, I'm hoping this is leading to kind of a renaissance in legal services. But those two organizations, I think, have really stepped up in leadership and then I think a lot of the bar associations, state, and of course the ABA, is doing a lot of work in this area, making sure that resources are easy to find.
Well, we'll make sure we have a link to the first two resources you mentioned there in the show notes, Molly. But this has been a wonderful conversation. It was great catching up with you. And before we leave, I was wondering if you have any parting thoughts for our listeners.
And other than thank you so much for having me. I know these are really scary times, and I think what's heartening is seeing how many people are coming together to work on solutions and ways to keep the justice system working.
I agree. I think the level of collaboration is really unprecedented, and the willingness to experiment is so heartening to see. And it feels like we've got permission to experiment, maybe in ways that we didn't feel like we as an industry had previously. So I'm optimistic, and I think share some of your optimism around some of the enduring impacts we might see from all of this. Great talking to you, Molly. Thanks again for joining us today.
All right, take care.
Thanks for joining us on Daily Matters today, a podcast from Clio. Rate and review wherever you get your podcasts, and subscribe so that you never miss an episode. Daily Matters is produced by Andrew Booth, Sam Rosenthal, and Derek Boland, and hosted by yours truly, Jack Newton. Thanks also to Clio, the world's leading cloud-based legal technology provider, for supporting this podcast. If you'd like to learn more about Clio, please visit clio.com.